Hello all, and the very warmest of welcomes to the True Crime Enthusiast podcast, North Wales' premier one man and his one-eyed cat talking tales of true crime that you may be unfamiliar with, you may not often be able to believe or even stomach. They're often forgotten or unfamiliar tales that I've scoured the world's underbelly to do so, to bring to you. I am as ever Paul, the creator, host and true crime enthusiast of the show's title. I've got the Peaks with me, of course, my true crime enthusiast cat, and both of us have you here to complete things for us, the wonderful enthusiasts that the show is for. It is as wonderful as always having you join us. You're ace for doing so, simple as that. And I hope that as you have, then you join us for an episode that finds you and yours all good, all safe, and all well. So, in the previous part of Voices, I brought you the disturbed history of Jason John Mitchell, a Suffolk resident who, having a troubled young life and a history of crime, both petty and graduating to more serious, was sentenced to an indefinite hospital order at the Old Bailey in 1990 for an attack on an elderly church caretaker in Epsom that he claimed later the voices he had heard for some considerable time by then had told him to do so. Within a year of this order, Jason Mitchell had applied to be released from this, citing progress, and which had been conditionally accepted, though was protracted. Yet, each of the steps to reintroduce him into the community had ultimately fallen flat, and by November 1994, he had been readmitted as an informal patient to Easton House, a ward of the former St Clement's Hospital in Ipswich. It was a ward he had absconded from 3 times previously, for periods ranging from several hours to several days, and which he was to once again on the 9th of December 1994, this time for a period of 11 days. A period of 11 days during which the disturbed Jason Mitchell gave in to the voices that had been a constant to him for years, and became a triple killer in. The episode contains details and descriptions of crimes and events, including descriptions of injury detail and of mental illness that some listeners may find disturbing and or distressing, so discretion is advised whilst listening in. Bearing that in mind, please join the True Crime Enthusiast for the second and concluding part of a tale that I've entitled Voices. On the 9th of December 1994, as I say, Mitchell had helped put up the Christmas decorations in Easton House, behaviour which was in marked contrast to his previous attitude to the staff and other patients there. Shortly after 7 p.m, a smartly dressed Mitchell approached the staff nurse on duty, Andy Palmer, and asked permission to go out for a while, which was granted, and when he left Easton House on that evening, he was free to go out so long as he returned, according to house rules, by 9:15 p.m. 3 days later, Palmer wrote, "He looked very smart when he came to the office door that evening, and I commented on this. He smiled warmly and thanked me. He looked as if he was ready for a party or some other festive social gathering, of which there were various going on at the time in the days leading up to Christmas. He then said, 'I'm just going out for a while for a short walk. Is that okay?' That was the last time I saw Jason Mitchell." Shortly before midnight on Friday the 9th of December 1994, the night staff nurse on duty noted that she'd been instructed by the nurse in charge to take action if Mitchell didn't return by 11:30 p.m. Mitchell had not returned to Easton House by then, in effect a Category B missing patient because he wasn't a restricted patient there under the confines of Section 37 and 41 of the Mental Health Act 1983. The missing persons procedure that I described in Part 1 was actioned, and a police telex from the early hours of the 10th of December shows Objection to publicity. Why? Missing persons form shows drugs violent. Within hours of the information that Jason Mitchell was a missing patient, the police took steps to trace him, calling on a former girlfriend of his at 10:30 a.m. on the 10th of December. and who told the police what she'd told them on the 2 previous occasions when they'd called on her looking for Mitchell after he'd absconded, that she hadn't seen him for 6 months and had no desire to do so. For the next 5 days, police action in the missing patient inquiry was confined to simply briefing various officers at the start of their shifts and responding to an updating inquiry from St. Clement's, never once checking the one place that Mitchell was likely to head to. In his own account of the 9th of December, he later described how during the day he had started to help nurse Yvonne Hines with the Christmas decorations, but felt paranoid at doing so, believing that in choosing the decorations he was being made to take part in a psychology test. He said, "I was very worried that people would find out what I was thinking." When at the end of the day he asked if he could go out for a walk, he later said he knew exactly where he was going. Now, at this point in the interview, he spoke in a very rapid, animated manner, and at times it's claimed he was massively thought disordered. But Mitchell said he went straight from the hospital to the former family home at 11 Acton Road in Bramford, saying, "There was something about my feet. I had to walk silently or quietly as I could. It's on a film or something. Silence of the Lambs, a horror film. I went straight to my father's." If he had thought that he was bound to be found by police, and his previous absences would have put him wise to the consequences of being absent without leave from the hospital, then he took no evasive action whatsoever, almost as if at one level he wanted to be traced and returned to the hospital. Despite the calls that police had made to 11 Acton Road on previous occasions when he'd absconded, this time there were no inquiries made by the police at his father's house, where he stayed for the next few days. Mitchell spent the ensuing weekend with his father Robert and was only seen to leave the house on Sunday the 11th of December at 7:15 p.m. to buy some old Holborn tobacco at the village shop, a short excursion during which he frightened 2 teenage girls when he chased them briefly. Now, to reach what was then the Happy Shopper, it's a co-op today, Mitchell would have turned left from his father's house in Acton Road and onto Bramford's main thoroughfare, the street, where almost immediately he would have passed Bramford Methodist Church, and right next to it, number 112, an attractive detached 2-bedroom bungalow that was at the time occupied by a retired couple in their mid-60s, Arthur and Shirley Wilson. The couple were well known and liked in the local community they'd lived in since 1985, not least as strong supporters of the church next door to their home, where both were devout worshippers, and since their retirement 18 months previously. Arthur had been for 42 years the station manager at Ipswich railway station, while Shirley had been a librarian, had involved themselves fully in church life. Like many, finding themselves busier during retirement than when they were working, if it wasn't spending time with the 6 grandchildren they had, then it was one of the other pastimes the couple enjoyed, the local Crown Green Bowls Club for Arthur, the British Legion, old-time dancing classes, sewing classes for Shirley, then it was activities to do with the church. Shirley was the organist there and former secretary of the church council, whilst always a keen gardener. He'd even won an award for best medium-sized station due to his dedicated tending of the grounds there. Arthur tended the church grounds. It's not thought that they knew Jason Mitchell, or he them, for the Wilsons had been in Bramford only since 1985, during which time Mitchell was mainly away in various institutions. But he was the last person the couple were ever to see. From the evening of the 12th of December, there had been concern for the safety of the 65-year-old Wilsons, and this grew. Neighbours had become worried when Arthur didn't attend a bowls match that evening, whilst on the 13th of December, Shirley uncharacteristically missed a carol concert that she was due to play the organ at. Eventually, the couple's 3 children, their son Christopher and daughters Catherine and Jill, alerted police when they received no answer to their calls to their parents. At 1:35 a.m. on Wednesday the 14th of December, police officers forced entry to 112 The Street and in separate rooms found the bodies of Shirley and Arthur Wilson, following which a team of some 60 officers, led by Detective Superintendent Peter Warbeck, began a murder inquiry with an initial working hypothesis that the killings were connected to a con artist who had been fooling his way into old people's homes and who had struck in Haverhill, Ipswich, Bury St Edmunds and Sudbury in the weeks before the killings, though this was, of course, later ruled out as a line of inquiry. Like in all close-knit communities when something like this happens, a cloud of fear subsequently hung over the village. Trade at local public houses dropped as customers stayed at home. Sales of burglar alarms and dogs rose, and many elderly residents simply refused to leave their homes. Bill Stoddart, who was then landlord of the Bramford Cock public house, told the local media, "If it had not been for pre-booked Christmas parties, there would have been just me and a couple of locals in here. People just weren't coming out." The Reverend William Robertson, the Methodist minister of Bramford Church, where the couple were interred just days later, added that he believed that the shock would stay with the villagers for years, saying, "Some of them will never get over it. This is something you see on TV and read in the newspapers. It's something that doesn't happen in your own community." There is fear because people don't know why the Wilsons were murdered, and fear that if it can happen to people you know, it can happen to you. After the murders, a meeting to implement Neighbourhood Watch was held in the village hall, which was attended by almost 80 worried local residents. And crisis counsellors even moved into Bramford to offer support services from there, to allay fears to residents that a marauding killer had descended upon them and had shattered their once peaceful community. A killer who was, in fact, less than 100 yards away. On Mitchell's own subsequent admission, he had intended on killing the Wilsons late on the Friday evening, claiming that he knew the bungalow as he'd previously burgled it, though this can't be ascertained, but was so sweaty and tired that he decided to leave it until Saturday, and so headed for his father's home. At about 7:30 p.m. on Saturday 10th of December, he had tried to break into the Wilsons' bungalow through a rear window, but was unsuccessful, and as the Wilsons were not at home, he had waited for them to return in their greenhouse to keep warm, describing, "It was a dark night, the moon was full, it was quite psychotic, quite psychopathic, serial killeristic, dead calm." Between midnight and past, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson returned home, and Mitchell claimed he had the idea of pushing them into the house, but there were people passing by who might be alerted, and so he therefore abandoned the attempt and went away. He stayed indoors most of the Sunday, apart from his brief excursion out to buy tobacco and where he'd chased the two teenage girls, and then at about lunchtime on Monday the 12th of December, Mitchell left his father's house, telling him he was going to return to Easton House. Robert Mitchell gave his son, who by now had no money, a couple of Red Band cigarettes, and Mitchell then duly left the house, but remained in the vicinity, instead heading to the Wilsons' house. He had a large knife with a compass at the end in his possession. Mr. Wilson was in the back garden at the time Mitchell arrived, and once he'd effected entry through the connecting door leading from the garage into the kitchen, Mitchell decided to wait in the house for a few hours, and so hid in the spare bedroom, taking off his shoes and lying on the bedroom floor with a duvet over him. When Mrs. Wilson returned just after 4 p.m, he confronted the couple, and when Mr. Wilson told him to leave and tried to escort him forcefully to the door, he told Mr. Wilson he wasn't going to leave, hit him on the head with the blunt end of the knife, causing a scalp wound, and then made Mr. and Mrs. Wilson go into the bathroom, where he made Mrs. Wilson tie her husband's hands up with scarves and gag him with an apron, then tied her hands with tree binder that he'd taken from their greenhouse on the previous Saturday night, and then separated the couple, putting Arthur into the main bedroom and Shirley into the living room. He claimed he asked them both if they were taking any prescribed tablets because he wanted to keep them alive as long as possible, before he then strangled Mrs. Wilson with his hands and a thin scarf from a drawer in her bedroom, after he had falsely told her that her husband was already dead, perversely because he claimed, "I wanted to give her some comfort." After killing Mrs. Wilson, Mitchell then went into the kitchen to get something to eat and smoked a cigarette, before he then killed Mr. Wilson, strangling him with a pair of tights and a scarf. Now, when Mitchell was recalling these killings later to hospital staff, he explained that he had had thoughts of burgling and then killing the occupants by strangulation, for he thought other methods could be less effective. He knew a knife would cause pain, and it could be difficult to be sure of getting the right place. Strangling, he claimed, was more certain, saying, "It's a hands-on experience." A bland remark made with no sense of the human significance of what he was saying. He even demonstrated the position of his hands as he had committed the murders, explaining why anatomically this was the most effective position to strangle someone, and that he had retained this information from a police program he'd seen on television many years before. He said he'd taken no drugs or alcohol before the killings, and experienced no voices or other abnormal phenomena at the time. He was focused on the killing completely, he claimed. At the time of the killings, he described he felt very excited and very angry, though the anger was not there before or afterwards. It came out of the blue, and he was quite shocked to feel it, he claimed. He experienced a survival instinct feeling, but afterwards he felt empty. He claimed he had thoughts of dismembering the couple's bodies, but heard someone come to the front door, and so panicked, took £25 he found in cash, and left. He commented, "It seemed as if I was on a social ladder of killing amongst killers. I was so afraid of not succeeding. Slapped wrist, you failed again. Once I'd succeeded with the Wilsons, I realised my love was so little, I knew I could do it." At about 5:15 p.m, he ran from the bungalow, and after calmly buying 2 cans of lager in the local shop, claimed later that he there and then formulated a plan to kill again in about a week's time, and subsequently looked for suitable detached houses for other killings, saying he wanted to carry on as much as possible. Mitchell then made his way to the Bosmere Guest House in Norwich Road in Ipswich, paying £15 in cash for a room for a single night, but by 5:45 a.m. on Tuesday the 13th of December, he had left the guest house and made his way back to Bramford, where a number of people saw him in the areas of Paper Mill Lane, close to the village shop, and River Hill, where 2 witnesses who saw him, and he isn't hard to miss, having a serpent and skull tattooed on his face, separately described him as smiling unnaturally, or having a silly smirk on his face. During the morning of 14th of December, while considerable police activity was centred on the Wilsons' bungalow, Mitchell was again seen nearby by a number of people, at about 7:15 a.m. in Witton Layers, then about 8:30 a.m. seen walking from there, but he was back there between 10 and 10:15 a.m, and then 10 minutes later he was back in Paper Mill Lane, where one witness saw him loitering near her home as she left, and found that when she'd returned, the house had been burgled, and £60 in cash had been stolen. A local resident who had known Mitchell since early school days, when she heard news of the killings, considered the fact that she had seen him on the 13th of December in Bramford with this silly smirk on his face, as she described, worth reporting to the police. And her statement was taken on the 14th of December, one of the first to have been in the murder inquiry. At about 12 noon that day, Mitchell had called at the Beeches Guest House in Ipswich, but found them to have no vacancies, and so had returned to the Bosmere Hotel, where he again paid for a single room for the night. On the 15th of December, Detective Constable Paul Royal and another officer called on Robert Mitchell at 11 Acton Road, where they took a written statement from him, which showed that Jason Mitchell had come straight to his father's home after leaving Easton House on the night of the 9th of December, and that father and son had spent the weekend together. Robert claimed that his son had left the home at around noon on Monday the 12th, saying that he was returning to Easton House, and that was the last he'd seen of him. His father had stated that he was aware that Mitchell had no money with him, and assured the officers that if his son returned, he would contact police. Robert Mitchell then handed the officer 2 Red Band cigarettes, which was found to be a highly significant piece of forensic evidence, for by then, a Red Band cigarette stub had been found in the Wilsons' bungalow, left there by the killer, for neither of them smoked. The stub was forwarded to a specialist laboratory, but a DNA examination ultimately proved inconclusive, DNA technology not being as far forward as it is today. The call at 11 Acton Road was logged by DC Royal on the Missing Persons Progress Report sheet, and on the same day the report sheet shows that his colleague, Police Constable Chris Humphreys, had telephoned Easton House to ask staff to notify police if there was any news of Mitchell or if he returned there. While police inquiries continued on the 15th of December, Mitchell was seen throughout the day by staff in the Bosmere guest house behaving restlessly. He paid a further £15 for another night's lodging, and it is believed that he stayed there, though again he left early in the morning, long before having breakfast. On Friday the 16th of December, between 1 and 2 p.m, Mitchell was seen in Argyle Street, close to the centre of Ipswich, by a nurse on the staff of Easton House, who telephoned them to report this sighting, and which staff there informed police about an hour later. By now, Mitchell was regarded as somebody who Murders Team detectives wished to implicate or eliminate from their inquiry, but he was still not traced after this, and as I said before, this thin 6 feet 3 inches tall fella with striking tattoos of a snake and skull on his cheek and a crucifix on his forehead, crescent moon on the side of his head, could reasonably be expected to have been quickly identified, especially when over the past couple of days he had been seen by several people in Bramford, including some who knew him well. After the mention of the sighting in Argyle Street, the progress report for the missing person inquiry showed an updated description, detailing a request that, if Mitchell returned, they be notified immediately. Shortly afterwards, they again telephoned and asked that Mitchell should not be informed of any police interest if he did return. The officers making these inquiries shown in the nursing notes to be DC Royal and PC Humphreys. If the police were by now seeking to interview Jason Mitchell as actively as records would indicate, it's surprising that they didn't consider it necessary to revisit Robert Mitchell, whose home was only about 100 yards from where the police mobile incident vehicle was parked opposite to the Wilsons' bungalow, and where Jason Mitchell now returned to stay with his father. Now, Robert Mitchell had apparently told the murder inquiry officers who interviewed him on the 15th of December that he would contact them if and when Mitchell returned. Whatever his true intentions, for reasons unclear, he didn't do so, and he was seen with his son near his home on Saturday the 17th of December at about 2:30 p.m, again about 100 yards from the police major incident caravan that was parked around the corner opposite the Wilsons' bungalow. Had he informed police that his son had returned, Robert Mitchell may have still been alive today, for late on Saturday the 17th or early on Sunday the 18th of December, Jason Mitchell called his 55-year-old father upstairs on the pretext of helping him to make the bed, and, taking him unawares, strangled him with a tie. After talking to his father's body for a while, he left it lying on the bed. Mitchell spent the next 2 days almost wholly in number 11, leaving it only briefly at about 5:30 p.m. on the 19th of December, before he then proceeded to dismember his father's body, leaving his torso on the bed, but hiding the arms, legs and head in sports holdalls in the loft. Horror beyond belief. According to Mitchell's later own account, he said he'd taken a hammer from the Wilsons' house and had thought of killing his father by hitting him on the head with it, or alternatively by pushing him down the stairs, but had decided against both methods. He had asked his father if he wanted help in making his bed, and when his father was leaning over the bed to fold the sheets down, Mitchell was behind him, looped the tie across the front of his father's neck, and fell on top of him, trapping his arms underneath his body. At the time of the killing, there was a quiz program on the radio, and Mitchell claimed he was asking his father to answer the questions as he strangled him. After the killing, he claimed he felt satisfied. I found it quite amusing. He said he had decided to dismember the body, but had to let rigor mortis set in first, claiming that he knew about the nature and timing of rigor mortis, and so bent his father's elbows so that later they would provide handles enabling him to lift his body. As with the previous killings, he said he'd taken no drugs or alcohol beforehand, nor had he experienced voices and no ideas of reference concerning the television. He said, however, before the killings he had felt very unwell, as if I was about to hallucinate and lose control. During the 2 days after killing his father, Mitchell said, I could feel grief welling up in me but blocked it off because I wanted to go on a reign of terror. He spent the next 2 days watching television and sleeping, for he said he'd slept very little during the preceding week. Apart from a brief trip to the shop at about 5:30 p.m. on the 19th of December, he had otherwise stayed inside. 2 days after the killing, he used a hacksaw and kitchen knife from the house to dismember his father's body, partly to facilitate disposal, which Mitchell claimed he knew would be horrific to do, but seemed not to want to stop, in his own words, and that he'd planned to go to another house to kill someone else in a new area, but had remained in the home. By now, what the police had found during an exhaustive forensic examination of the Wilsons' bungalow were numerous fingerprint impressions. Some that were found on the 14th of December had defied identification until they'd been chemically treated on more than one occasion, but by the 19th were finally suitable for photographic comparison. All of the marks that were found at the Wilsons were compared by an expert in the Suffolk Police Fingerprint Bureau on the 20th of December, where, at about 3 p.m, a number of these were identified as having been made by Jason John Mitchell. This information was passed to Superintendent Warbeck, and a decision was taken to now release publicly Jason Mitchell's name and description as being someone who the police urgently wanted to interview in connection with the deaths of Arthur and Shirley Wilson, and a press release was given out. At 5:15 p.m. on the 20th of December, police officers from the murder inquiry team paid their second call to 11 Acton Road. The house was in darkness and there was no reply to repeated knocking, so it was decided to force entry. It was DC Paul Royal who broke in with 5 other officers to find Mitchell sitting quietly on a sofa in the darkened living room, looking vacant and disorientated, staring straight ahead. "I've strangled my father. I cut him up," were his words to officers. After the officers had found the dismembered torso of Robert Mitchell in the upstairs bedroom, and his limbs and head in separate holdalls in the loft, for the smell alone there told them that something terrible had occurred, an entirely calm and self-possessed Jason Mitchell was arrested, handcuffed, and taken to Ipswich Police Station. After being arrested, Mitchell appeared to be in a state of ecstasy, and was even alleged to have sung the Black Song wonderful life from his police cell. On the evening of the 20th of December, the doctor whose care Mitchell was under at Easton House, Dr. Raymond Goddard, was informed that Jason Mitchell was under arrest on suspicion of murder, and although he wasn't the duty consultant, at the request of a police surgeon, Dr. Knight, Dr. Goddard went to Ipswich Police Station that night ostensibly for the police purpose of determining Jason Mitchell's fitness for detention and interview. Mitchell told Dr. Goddard that he had experienced an urge to kill from the age of 6, when he first put a pillow over his father's head, and that he had formulated the idea for killing for several months before leaving Easton House on the 9th of December. Though in this part of the interview he found it difficult to give a clear,